No, you need to move over a little bit. There you go. Wait for it to focus. There you go. Go crazy.
The Cold War perhaps is the most important event in the world, much less the United States, after World War II. The Cold War dominates American society, dominates the American economy, dominates the American political scene, and our foreign policy, obviously, for the 1945 to 1990 time period. It also has a tendency to dominate what happens in the world in that time period as well. The issues are very clear. Who is responsible for the start of the Cold War? Traditionally, America looks and says, the Cold War was us stopping the Soviet Union from its seeking to dominate the world. And the blame is placed on the Soviet Union. But a more nuanced and sophisticated understanding actually looks and says, it could have been avoided. Who is responsible for starting the Cold War? What are the events? And who are the people? And what are the circumstances that might account for how this Cold War started? And then, as I said before, the impact is extraordinary. Economically, politically, socially, culturally, and in our foreign policy on the world. The Cold War is by definition certain things. And when you have a definition, look at it and say who, what, where, when, why, and how about the Cold War. It's like the Progressive Era. It's like certain things in American history. Know the who, what, where, when, and why, and how. And you have a basis not only for cocktail party conversation, but for an interesting and important analysis of America and the world. Who? The United States, and we know what that is, and it's against the USSR. And you have to know that the Bolsheviks had a revolution in October of 1917. They took over, and within a few years after their civil war, what they have is a Soviet Union. It is the union of Soviet socialist republics. The USSR is the Soviet Union, is what we fight against in the Cold War. And it's a union of Soviet, that very important term that the Soviets look at and say, this is all of us working together in this small little body. Soviet socialist, they believe in socialism, republics. It's a giant empire stretching from the Pacific to the Baltic Sea. So the USSR and the United States are there. What is it? It is a Cold War. It is not a war where we kill Soviets, where they kill us. It's a Cold War where we fight against each other in other ways. Why did this war take place? Because we wanted to take over the world. And because the Soviet Union wanted to take over the world. It is a war for world domination. And again, that goes against the traditional notion of the United States seeking only to stop communism. But I think most historians would look and say, in fact, John Gaddis in his recent book, The Cold War Revisited, would look and say, each side is seeking to control, make the world look like it. Where does this war take place? Everywhere. From the bottom of the ocean to the North and South Pole, every single part of the entire Earth and in outer space is where the Cold War takes place. It is indeed a world war. Who, what, where, when? 1945, right at the end of World War II. In 1990, I think some people go the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, but by 1990, into that year, the Soviet Union is falling apart, the United States has won, the Cold War is indeed over. How is this war fought? And that's what's extraordinarily interesting and important. It is a war for world domination. It is between us and the USSR. And it is fought everywhere on the world. But it's fought through proxies. Stand-in. Somebody who is not the actual person fighting, somebody who's standing in. And you can take any conflict in the Cold War and you can look and say, the North Vietnamese are the proxy for the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is fighting through its proxy, North Vietnam. our proxy, the United States, is a proxy called South Vietnam. And they're fighting. So the proxies are fighting, often about a local indigenous event that is totally separate from the conflict of the two superpowers. But it's still there that the two superpowers are fighting each other through the proxies. Now often, the superpower will get involved in the war itself too, in the conflict itself too. And Vietnam stands as the perfect example, that the US is fighting the North Vietnamese, and the South Vietnamese are fighting the North Vietnamese. The US never fights the Soviet Union directly. Korean War, just the Soviet Union fighting through its proxy of North Korea, fighting South Koreans, and the US will involve itself in there and become fighting along with the proxies. Afghanistan, we never go into Afghanistan. The Soviet Union involves itself in Afghanistan. The Soviet Union has a proxy of the Afghan government. We are using our proxies, the Mujahideen, to fight against the Soviets and their proxy government. So it's this unique, interesting combination of involvement of the superpowers around the world during war with proxies fighting on their behalf. That's the brief introduction to the Cold War. That's the brief introduction that you should have to go forward in this world in all those things. Number two are causes or origins. The origins or causes of the Cold War have to do with the World War II diplomacy. And what you have are the conferences. And the conferences are pretty easy to put together. We have Tehran. Tehran is a conference, 1943, where the big three get together. Churchill comes, Roosevelt comes, Stalin comes, and Tehran in 43 is designed how we're gonna fight the war. It's a good conference, and they meet, and the Allied powers get together and discuss how we're gonna fight the war. And in fact, we promise Stalin that second front. We don't deliver on it until over a year later in the middle of June 1944, but it works pretty well. Second conference is Yalta, extraordinarily important conference. And this is in February of 45. And again, look at the pictures of Roosevelt sitting in between Churchill, having a good time as always, Stalin, vigorous, fairly young man, and Roosevelt dying. It's 45, the war is winding down, and the purpose of Yalta is to settle the end of war. How are we gonna end the war? And at Yalta, the extraordinary promise takes place. We need the Soviet Union to attack Japan to end the war in Japan. We know the war in Europe is going to be ending soon. We know Nazi Germany is defeated. We get their promise to attack Japan within 6 months of Hitler's fall. That is everything for us because we don't have the bomb yet. So we need the Soviets' influence in Japan. They are already in control, they being the Soviet Union. Stalin has pushed forward and is already in control of the entire swath of Eastern Europe. All the countries that Wilson created in 1919 in Paris are now under Soviet control. From Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia up north, all the way down to Bulgaria and Romania in the south, they're all under Soviet control. And they have that. What do we want from the Soviet Union? We want them to bring democracy. So we want them to have democratic, as it said, free and fair elections in Eastern Europe. The Poles are our primary bête noire. They're the ones that we want to keep free. But all those countries, and Stalin promises, will have free and fair elections. And what do? Give them Eastern Europe. They're in control of it already. Few options at that point in time. In fact, Patton is cashiered for a point in time because he advocates invading the